Try to push an embarrassing memory out of your head, and it usually takes about 5 seconds for it to rush right back in. The harder you push a thought down, the more violently it breaches the surface when you inevitably lose your grip. Early psychological theorists, like Sigmund Freud, suspected that expelled thoughts possess a unique power that forces them back into consciousness. In 1987, psychologist Daniel Wegner decided to test the actual mechanics of this process, creating the first standardized laboratory paradigm to rigorously track thought suppression. The parameters were straightforward. Participants were told to sit in a room for 5 minutes and explicitly instructed not to think of a white bear. If the thought did cross their mind, they had to ring a bell. The attempt at mental control failed almost immediately. Participants rang the bell an average of more than once per minute, indicating the target thought continually re-entered conscious awareness. Then, the researchers flipped the mandate. They gave the participants another 5 minutes, but this time instructed them to actively think about a white bear. This chart maps the frequency of those thoughts. A control group who only did the expression phase showed a steady, moderate rate of thinking about the bear, but the group who spent 5 minutes suppressing the thought experienced a massive spike. Looking at this gap reveals a counterintuitive mechanism. The preceding act of suppression actively increased the thought's long-term accessibility. When an intrusive thought refuses to leave your head, it isn't a failure of willpower. The act of attempting to suppress the thought actively sabotages the normal functioning of the mind. To understand why this sabotage occurs, Wegner formulated what he called the ironic process theory. This framework shows that mental control is not a single unified action. It relies on a fragile two-part cognitive architecture. The first mechanism is the intentional operating process. This system is conscious, high effort, and requires significant cognitive resources to run. Its sole job is to promote your preferred mental state. If you are trying not to think of a white bear, this operating process aggressively floods your conscious mind with thoughts of a chair, the stormy weather, a catchy song, literally anything else. While that engine works, a second mechanism operates in the background, the ironic monitoring process. This is an unconscious, low-effort system that continuously scans your mind. To protect your mind from the unwanted thought, this monitor must continuously search for the exact thought you are trying to suppress, so it can alert the operating process to deploy a new distraction. Successful mental control requires a feedback loop, where the brain must continuously look for the exact threat it exhausts itself trying to ignore. The operating process relies heavily on cues in your immediate physical environment to find its distractions. Your attention rapidly and erratically jumps to mundane items nearby, a spot on the wall, the texture of a chair, the clothes you are wearing, grabbing onto anything to maintain focus away from the target thought. The brain inadvertently wires strong associative links between the unwanted target thought and all of these random environmental distractors. When you relax, stepping out of the experiment room, finishing your task, or trying to go to sleep, you voluntarily drop the goal of active suppression. The moment that high-effort operating process powers down, the everyday items you used as safe distractors instantly become triggers. Seeing the chair or the wall now cues the unwanted thought straight back into your consciousness. This mechanism, known as distractor association, is the specific cause of the post-suppression rebound observed in the earlier white bear experiment. The conscious effort to hide from an intrusive thought essentially booby-traps your surrounding environment with invisible reminders, making the thought's eventual return inescapable. We know what happens when you relax mental control, but what happens to this fragile system if we add intense cognitive strain? This strain is called cognitive load. It acts as a competing demand on limited resources, often induced by extreme time pressure or complex memory tasks. In 1992, researchers Wegner and Erber tested this systemic vulnerability using a modified Stroop color naming task. They asked subjects to suppress a target word, while simultaneously requiring them to hold a random 9-digit number in their working memory. The 9-digit number completely consumes the high-bandwidth operating process. Deprived of resources, the conscious distraction engine stalls out. The ironic monitoring process, however, requires almost no executive function. While the top layer breaks down under the cognitive load, the low-bandwidth monitoring radar continues running smoothly and uninterrupted. Without the operating process to provide distractions, The vigilant radar pings the target thought directly into an entirely undefended conscious awareness. The empirical data proves this through a state called hyperaccessibility. Under a cognitive load, subjects attempting to suppress specific words actually showed faster reaction times to those words in the Stroop task than subjects who weren't suppressing them. When executive processing power is depleted, the mental control architecture collapses, actively flooding the mind with the exact thought it was designed to block. The mechanical failures seen in laboratory Stroop tasks govern the progression of severe psychopathologies, specifically obsessive-compulsive disorder and trauma recovery. For decades, a widespread cognitive behavioral intervention aimed at helping patients manage intrusive thoughts was a technique known as thought stopping. The actual mechanics of thought stopping are quite literal. Clinicians would instruct patients to snap a rubber band on their wrist or firmly verbalize the word stop the instant an unwanted thought arose. Through the lens of ironic process theory, this clinical intervention is shown to be fundamentally counterproductive. Constantly monitoring the mind to stop thoughts creates an artificial cognitive load. It exhausts the operating system while triggering the unconscious radar to find the exact thought it's avoiding. This feedback loop turns suppression into a clinical compulsion, steadily increasing the severity of intrusive thoughts. Traditional thought-stopping interventions inadvertently weaponize the brain's monitoring architecture against the patient, converting temporary anxiety into chronic, structured obsession. If active mental suppression is guaranteed to backfire, how can individuals ever escape the hyperaccessibility loop? The scientifically validated alternative is the clinical principle of acceptance, utilized in frameworks like acceptance and commitment therapy and mindfulness practices. The protocol of acceptance trains patients to recognize an intrusive thought purely as a transient cognitive event without applying any effort to banish it. By officially removing the mandate of suppression, the ironic monitoring process loses its target and powers down. Without the radar constantly pinging and elevating it, the unwanted thought naturally decays and drifts out of conscious awareness over time. Acceptance frees up the massive cognitive bandwidth previously hogged by the operating process, allowing the patient to return focus to functional, present-moment tasks. True, lasting mental control is not achieved by building stronger cognitive walls against unwanted thoughts, but by systematically dismantling the internal alarms that keep us tethered to them.